All right, part two of Tourism as a Strategy for Development lecture in Tourism as a Strategy for Development. So moving on, I'm going to talk about Bali. I've spoken about Bali a little bit already. I find it a really interesting case study as a place that has developed really due to tourism and used tourism as a strategy for development. So Bali has a democratic national government that's based in Jakarta. So Bali's part of Indonesia. It's an island. The Balinese government says it's democratic, and that would indicate that people vote. There's Muslim and Hindu religions and cultures in there. So there's two different types of religions, which are really very quite different. Tourism is about 30% of Bali's gross regional domestic product. Tourism employs just under a quarter of the workforce, although I suspect indirectly it influences a lot more of that. So tourism might directly employ a quarter, but then, because there's more cars on the road, because of tourism, there's probably more mechanics. So there's that sort of flow-on effect of employment. And compared with neighbouring islands, such as, Lombok's slowly developing itself, but, most of the other islands, Indonesia's a pretty massive archipelago with thousands of islands. None of them seem to have the same the other way around. Most of them have quite high levels of poverty, and Bali's levels of poverty are much better. They don't have as much poverty. I don't make this very clear, but Bali does not have as much poverty as many of all the other islands, I don't think, actually, in Indonesia. Or the neighbouring islands anyway. Maybe Jakarta as a capital city, Java is on Java. I think Java probably does okay, but most of the little islands around Bali don't have very good indicators. Ooh, go like this. And so there's an indication there that tourism has actually worked as a strategy for development for Bali. Okay, so the Jakarta Post, here I'll just move my face over here for a minute. Okay, so the Jakarta Post, Bali faces population boom, now home to 4.2 million residents. Okay, that was in 2012 they were talking about that, so it's probably a lot more than that now. I'll bring my face back over here because it's easier. So tourism has been used as a strategy for development. There's been a massive population boom. In 1961, Bali had 1.78 million people-ish. 2012, 4.22 million, so similar to Melbourne. The birth rate increased. So I don't know if you're familiar with the demographic transition model. I don't know if I've got a picture of that. Oh, yes, I have. That's good. Well, I'll talk about that now. This is the demographic transition model. If anybody's ever done geography at school or university, you've probably come across this. Certainly, I'm a geographer. This is my sort of bread and butter, thinking about this. So this idea is talking about as a place develops, the total population begins to increase. But when a place is very, very undeveloped in stage one, there is a high death rate and a high birth rate. So people are having babies because it's a high death rate. They'll have more babies. Sometimes it's to do with the lack of access to contraception if they're in a really low development place. But quite often they will, because there's in a low development place, or a developing place, there's often no access to aged care. And so having a number of children is really important to ensure that you're going to be cared for in your old age. Not all of your children are going to make it, so you have quite a few just to sort of, be on the safe side. Hopefully a couple of them will survive long enough to look after you if you happen to have the misfortune of getting old. Of course, you're less likely to get old because your death rate's much higher. Your life expectancy is much lower, and that's not written in here, but your life expectancy is much, much lower here. Okay, so here you can see your total population. So your death rate's high and your birth rate's high, and that equates to quite a low, stable population because it doesn't grow very much because lots of people born, lots of people die. And then what happens is as the conditions get better and sanitisation works, people have access to clean water, maybe, you know, they're not dying of really preventable diseases, people are coming in and giving you immunisations for certain diseases, you're not having waterborne disease in your water because you've got access to clean water and food, and you've got better nutrition so you can, you know, sort of live a longer and healthier life. What happens is your death rate drops off. But culturally, you're still used to having loads of babies because that's really important. And your birth rate tends to stay sort of similar. They say here it wavers a little bit, but in the end it stays similar. So what happens is you've got more people being born, less people dying, and your population increases. And up it goes. And what happens is after a while, people realise that they don't need to have so many babies anymore. And then you're moving into stage 3. And slowly but surely, your birth rate drops off. Oh, hang on. I'll just pause. Sorry about that interruption. Okay, so we'll get back to the demographic transition model. So yeah, so the birth rate decreases, the death rate decreases, and then what it happened to end up having in like a developed nation such as the United States, UK, a number of European countries, and obviously Australia, is a fairly stagnant and potentially declining population as the death rate slowly sort of remains about the same, or maybe even slowly decreases, and the birth rate decreases even more. So that's the demographic transition model. And that's the reason I'm talking about that is when we're thinking about, you know, this tourism as a strategy for development, you can see that the population boom is placing Bali in this sort of stage 2 and stage 3 of the demographic transition model. You know, the Bali governor in the Jakarta Post said that there's an increase in attractiveness and standards of living. So a lot of people are actually moving to Bali because of the promising economy, according to this dude. And that's quite interesting because so it's not just us travelling there more and increasing in the visitor arrivals, it's also the fact that people are migrating to Bali to work there because they see more economic opportunity. Okay, and then when you think about that in terms of the tourism area life cycle, which I'm sure Bruce would have introduced you to in the introduction to sustainable tourism management lectures in the first unit of this course. The Butler's tourism area life cycle talks about how you start out, you know, it's a similar kind of trend to what happens here. Your population increases in a similar kind of pattern in a tourist destination. You start with a low number of visitors. So this is number of tourists up on the y-axis. And as you go across time on the x-axis, you start with a low number of tourists, and then people, you know, really adventurous kind of people who like undeveloped and untouched, unexplored kind of places. They start visiting and enjoying it, and then they start sharing, you know, images about it to others, talking about it, and over time more and more people come, and as more and more people come at stage 2, so that was discovery and exploration stage. Stage 2 is when the locals start getting involved in the industry and they start opening little, you know, restaurants and cafes and backpackers, B&Bs, sort of small scale local involvement, and then development often comes, and that's often in the sort of you know, investment in infrastructure to accommodate maybe a new hotel. So there's new investment comes in usually in the development phase, and then more of that sort of occurs, and that's sort of going through the consolidation phase of this. So the product is developing. But then it hits a certain number and all of a sudden it's a little bit old hat. A lot of people have already been there, might have a bad reputation of being overdeveloped and too commercial and too expensive. And at that point you hit some form of stagnation phase. And it's at that point that a lot of destinations find that they have to decide that to either rejuvenate or reduce their growth and try and grow but at a lower level, stabilise and sort of say, here he argues that you can't stay the same, you can't sustain at a certain level, you've either got to just increase it a small amount or decrease it a small amount, or decline or have an immediate decline if you don't plan for it or you're not resilient. Similarly, Bruce's model here talks about a similar idea. He challenges Butler's tourism area life cycle to talk about the phase 1, 2, 3 and 4 of tourism. So you start with local tourism, which is a similar sort of idea. Then you go to regional tourism, where there's people coming in from local areas and maybe nearby countries, but from not very far afield. Then national tourism starts. So he's arguing that as you develop, you get more and more international tourists, and that your destination becomes slowly more and more known as an international destination versus just a local destination. So this is his resort development spectrum. Okay, so when you're thinking about all of this in terms of Bali, Bali is an interesting place. So these are some of my pictures from my travels. You can see all of us sitting there. This is my mate Jo, and our daughters are all friends. They've all got their hair braided in that bottom picture, or at least some of them have. And we're in an agritourism place right there. This is a lady. They have the luwak coffee, which is the gorgeous little luwak kind of cat-like creature, possumy catty thing, that eats the coffee beans and only picks the really, really nice ones. Doesn't really digest the beans, poos them out. That chemically, I think, changes them. They shell them and then they roast them and grind them, and that becomes luwak coffee. And a lot of people talk about it as cat poo coffee and stuff like that. But it's well known to be absolutely superb because the luwak is only ever choosing the best beans, whereas when you've got commercial coffee, quite often it's just a big picker that just takes them all off. So this is the luwak coffee plantation. There's hundreds of them, I'm pretty sure. There's definitely loads of them on the I want to say the banks of the mountain. It's the banks, is it? It's the slopes of the big volcano. As you go up the volcano in your tour bus, they'll invariably park in one that probably belongs to their brother-in-law, or they have a commercial arrangement with to go into, or something like that. So this is, and you get a tour. You get to walk around, have a look at the luwak in his little cage. You get to see them actually shelling and seeing the poo, seeing all the different phases, how it's made, and then you get a free tasting at the end, and then you have to walk through a shop and you usually buy something nice because it's a nice thing to do. And usually you take it home and tend not to drink it or give it away as a gift. They have cooking schools now in Bali. This is something that's new. Certainly that wasn't around when I was visiting Bali 15 years ago. This is taking on this idea that people love to learn how to cook. Now, this is my daughter learning how to cook a Moroccan dish in Bali because I had a Moroccan chef at the hotel we stayed at. And there's a lot of cooking schools. So it's not just learning how to cook Indonesian food, it's also learning how to cook global food. And this is quite interesting because this sort of tells about the global nature of Bali, that it's becoming quite a global destination, that people aren't just going there to experience the local stuff, but just to have an experience. And these are some fish. It's a fish tour, fish market tour. So I actually went on this tour. This gentleman here is the chef, and he actually took us to the local fish market in Jimbaran. We went around and it didn't smell like I thought it would. I actually was really not looking forward to it, but it was sensational actually. It was amazing, beautiful fresh fish that had just come in. He haggled, he let us choose fish that we liked, and then he'd haggle and get good fresh ones, and then he'd take us back and teach us how to cook it. So these are all things that are quite new in Bali, and Bali's really developing these sort of new things. And these are really cool because this fish market tour is putting us as tourists in, we paid for that tour, and it's putting us in direct contact with local fishermen. So this is sort of partnerships with agricultural producers and other sort of primary producers that they're talking about. This is putting us into direct contact with the farmers, the luwak coffee farmers. And so what it's showing is that it's making these linkages, and we're feeling like we're getting quite an interesting and deep experience, which is, I think, quite cool. Food and agritourism. So there's now iconic dining experiences. So this is the rock bar still that I had the picture of earlier. These are this is worthy of any gourmet. There's a fig gin, I think it's gin and tonic. I actually can't remember. I had a couple. So this is, you know, looking out over this, you can watch the sunset off Rock Bar, and you've got these amazing sort of noodle wrapped prawns at Kuka, which is the chef from Kuka is actually from what was the top restaurant in the world for some time before Noma took its crown in Barcelona, and for the life of me I can't remember what it's called now, but it was a very, very famous restaurant. El Bulli is what it was called, and El Bulli was pioneered the idea of foaming, sort of along the Heston Blumenthal sort of idea, and they actually took that on and they made all these manipulations of materials and foods to make things that were really interesting. One of the El Bulli chefs established Kuka in Bali, and it's absolutely incredible. So we often will go there at least once when we're in Bali usually. And so this is it's a truly food destination. This is incredible gourmet food. Absolutely delicious, definitely rivaling anything that I would eat in a top restaurant in Melbourne. And this is available in Bali now. You know, before it was just sort of kebabs and skewers on a stick down the street, maybe a bit of nasi goreng or, you know, the other one, nasi, or the noodle one, mee goreng. Nowadays, you're getting these incredible glasses. This looks European, this looks incredible, but it's got a beautiful Balinese tinge to it. And it's really adapting this to these ideas to the Asian environment, and they're more affordable too. So people are really becoming quite attracted to these areas for these reasons. They also developing quality design. So whilst, you know, you might wonder about the benefits of the rock wall, the rock bars pool there, you know, is it really safe having a sort of a retaining wall built on sand? And I'm sure probably somebody here might recall the biblical tale of being careful not to build your house on sand. You know, you should build your house on rock because the sand will wash away and your house will fall down. It's talking about having solid foundations. Often I think about that when I look at the Rock Bars swimming pool there because it looks quite sandy. We have, but nonetheless, they do have these incredible designs, and I think that's the thing, is whether it's quality workmanship, I don't know, whether it's quality in terms of how it's, you know, its foundations and so forth, I don't know, but in terms of its design credentials, it is absolutely outstanding, and it makes magazines all over the world. Here we have this is just a wall up here on the right hand side. It's a wall in Kuta as you're walking along, and it's got a whole bunch of old shutters, like doors that they've obviously reclaimed from various places as they've maybe knocked them down or to build other things. And it just creates this amazing design feature in Kuta. Here we've got Ayana Resort, which is this incredible sort of water feature suspended. You can't see this, but this is actually suspended in air out. There's a window in the bottom. You can only just see there's a circle in the middle there. And that's actually a window down that sheds light through the water into the bar below. You can sit down in these sunken lounges in this water feature and watch the sunset in Ayana. It's just incredible. And so there's a lot of they have a lot of freedom to build things. We probably couldn't build something like that in Australia because of the building restrictions, engineering requirements. That's Rimba is part of Ayana. Ayana also has Rock Bar. So these are all actually, these, except for the Kuta picture, these are all part of the same resort that's spread over a vast amount of area with a golf course. But these design features are absolutely incredible. So it's interesting, we couldn't do this in Australia, and they're using this as a bit of a comparative advantage. Their relatively relaxed laws are giving them the ability to actually get the jump on Australia. You can have this opulent luxury that you really couldn't have in Australia for a price that you could definitely not have in Australia. And it's really next door to Australia, so it's really providing steep competition. There's adventure tourism, so this is us, that's me in the red t-shirt, yeah, looking flash, and all of our children, me and Joe and our combined bunch of kids off on holiday together, and you can get driven up the edge of the volcano and you ride all the way down through rice paddies and amazing temples, and you get to go in and have a look at a traditional house that's kind of been opened up so you can see how a compound's organised, with a cooking house and a old people's house and the family house and so forth. So yeah, these are actually booming, these tours. So there's this incredible generation. So of new stuff, of new products. When I went back to Bali some years ago for the first time so I probably went back to Bali 6 years ago for the first time in 20 years, 15 years. And what I found was I was prepared to be bored. I thought, oh geez, it's just cheap drinks places on the beach and you just buy some cheap stuff. But we got there and the accommodation was incredible. The food was incredible. The experiences were not like any experience I'd had before. And I actually totally fell in love with it. And I thought that Bali was doing an incredibly good job at developing itself. All right, water bomb in Bali is massive. It's huge and it's incredibly well managed. In fact, we would argue that it's far better managed, run for us as customers. I don't know what the behind the scenes is like, but in terms of our experience as customers, it's way better than any amusement park that we would have in Australia. So you have these, still you have a lot of safety requirements on these. They look like, it seemed to us that they had Australian safety standards on these rides, and Australians just love it. This is in the heart of Kuta and it's just incredible. Previously you're focused on the beach and surfing and diving, but now there's all these iconic swimming pools like this one here, there's other really amazing ones, and water bomb, and you can still go and have a drink there and you can still relax and enjoy yourself, and it's a safe environment. They've got so you've still got water, you've still got consumption, cafes and bars are part of the water experience, both in the Rock Bar here, in other like Far Horizons, what's it called? Not Far Horizons, that's in Cairns. The Four Seasons in Bali, lots and lots of places that have these iconic, beautiful swimming pools, infinity pools looking out over sunsets with, rent your own little hut thing and we'll bring you drinks all afternoon sort of thing for, a price, but still actually an affordable price, far more so than in Australia. So they have cleverly worked out ways, although their beach is really beautiful, quite regularly people will go to Bali and have these amazing experiences, around pools and looking out over vistas without actually setting foot in their natural environment. We were on paved paths all the way down the volcano for our bike ride, well, mostly paved, but they were very well made paths. We weren't personally, I didn't feel impacting physically on the environment. We hardly walked on the beach. The beach was being left, there were a lot of people still on the beach, but they were being left to their own devices there, while we went in and paid money for these experiences. So what Bali first became famous for, which was its surfing, and that sort of interaction, natural environment, has actually gone by the wayside for a more cultured and more refined experience. The inland development's really interesting. So land so this is a rice paddy. It's pretty much for decorative purposes. I guess they probably harvest it. The land is in this, so this is on the banks of the volcano. There's a couple of volcanoes that basically make up Bali. It's just a volcanic island. It's worth more as a tourism development than it is under rice. And this is a real problem for their food security and their integrity as an ecosystem as well. The water systems have always worked in Bali where the water actually goes through each farm. So you have a farm and you have your rice paddies and the water runs through, and that satisfies your rice paddy, then it runs through to the next farmers and the next farmers and so forth. And so obviously you can imagine there's a very traditional set of laws around how that management works. when developers came in and offered large amounts of money to landowners for building developments such as this, the planning laws were not geared to accommodate the water security issues. And now what's happening is that people are literally losing their water supplies. And the problem with that is that these places are consuming large amounts of water. They're polluting water with, soap and, hosing down places, cartering places, anti-mould, who knows what goes into their water. And it's not being treated properly. And it's not travelling down the volcano as required. So there's not as much water reaching the lowlands. Most of the water, I'm not sure if there's any reservoir in Bali, but most of the water I know of in Kuta, which is down on the lowlands near the beach, has always been sourced by bores, which sources groundwater. They have sourced so much groundwater from these bores now that the water table, and because they've cut off the water supply coming down the volcano to these places, has actually compromised that water table, and now it's not safe to drink the water. And so now it's polluted, their water table's polluted, and I don't know if they're ever going to be able to clean it up. And so how are the benefits shared? When you think about this, when you think about tourism and all the wonderful things that are happening in Bali, and then you think about the farmers who are basically losing water, locals who don't have clean water to access anymore because of the pollution in their water table, and you think about the impacts on the infrastructure and having to have water treatment plants, which don't tend to happen in Bali at the moment anyway, that I'm aware of. Maybe they're getting there. What we find is that actually the distribution of wealth is really not equitable. The people who are owning these big tourism developments, often external investors, are winning, and the local people with their local cultural practices in rice farming, their local cultural practices in terms of surviving and having clean water and having all these lovely intertribal laws and systems in terms of how they're in interfamily systems of how they manage their water are being disrupted. Now, we took this photo and we were told that the rice paddies were now set aside for tourists to see, as most of them are now being used for tourism development. There's a special viewing platform, a man carrying rice, posing for photos, and postcard stalls and cafes. That's what was at this place when we went there. So this for the first time I saw this rice paddy. I was not even 20, I was probably only about 18. And I went there and I got to walk through and actually touch the rice and with my bare feet and feel what it would be like to actually be a rice farmer from a person who was a rice farmer. And there was a little park there, so you could place to park the bus that we were on, so we could stop and we could go and we could meet someone who was actually a farmer. And I felt like I'd seen a little bit of Bali. When I went and saw this, I felt like I'd gone and seen a tourism attraction. I didn't feel like that same experience had happened. So whilst I feel there's been a lot of things gained in Bali, I felt like this was a true loss, and it has deep implications for the people of Bali, and potentially it's avoidable if it had been planned better. Oh, this is another one of this is the Four Seasons swimming pool at the end of Jimbaran Beach there. So they've got relaxed laws on the use of and access to beaches, coastal zones for alcohol consumption, dining and accommodation, prioritisation of development. So, there is a power differential. The relaxed building and pool fencing codes. So you could never have anything like this in Australia. It just wouldn't. It would never pass any safety laws in any way. There's yet again, you've built your retaining wall on the sand. It's going to it's probably going to fall into the water at some point. A child could climb up and drown here. I mean, ironically, a child could also climb into the ocean and drown. In Australia, though, this would matter. You need to have a fence because you own this pool. It's your responsibility, whereas nobody owns the ocean. Actually more on the side of Bali on this one personally, but everyone has their viewpoints, I guess. The mixed uses, so fishing and cultural activities, is this sustainable? And this is the question. it's complex, isn't it? There's some, they've really sort of started taking the pressure off some of their natural environment by having these beautiful built, design-focused, high-value tourist operations. How much of the value chain, how much of this is actually going to the locals? Are locals really benefiting from this? Is this really developing Bali and the people in Bali, or is this actually just lining the pockets of investors at the expense of the people in Bali? Quite often in developing nations, it's the latter. And we, of course, don't know all the ins and outs. There's probably aspects of both. But when we're assessing sustainable development or tourism development for sustainability, these are the complex questions. It's not black and white. It's not straightforward. And when we're thinking about this, how would we consider moving forward? I know personally I'd start going to the planning department and start talking to them about how they're going to manage their water and infrastructure, but more to the point, how they're going to manage their corruption, how they're going to stop awarding contracts to the mayor's cousin, or I'm not saying that they do, but there always is in these places those links that occur, and you end up with people, taking, $6 million for a road upgrade, and only $3 million is actually put into the road upgrade, and it develops potholes within a year, and no one's called to account for it. In Australia, you'd have a workmanship guarantee and you'd have to go back at your own expense and fix those potholes. Those systems are just not in place in Bali. And so personally, I think that's where I would start. But then what would happen is that a natural order that's occurred in Bali to allow this development might start to break down, and other consequences might occur. We may find that prices start going up, or that there's a social unrest for whatever reason. You don't always know exactly how these things are going to play out. Okay, locals are losing access to coastal resources because they're being claimed by, so here, the beach here, this area belongs to the Four Seasons. In Australia, you couldn't possibly own that land. Everybody's entitled to use water, to use land up to the high tide mark. So everyone is allowed to walk around the entire coast of Australia if they can physically access it. And I love that as my right as an Australian to be able to do that. It's not the same in Bali and a lot of other places. So these coastal resources that might have had natural rivers that were maybe even supplying, being nurseries to fisheries, they're being sort of blocked up. You can see a natural waterway down here that Jamila's looking out underneath the bridge. It's polluted, it's manky. Once upon a time, it might have been a seasonal river that had little fish in it that you might have been able to eat. Now you certainly wouldn't even dip your toe in it. There's moral and cultural conflicts, so bikini wear and alcohol consumption are issues. My kids love walking around in their bikinis, but of course, that there's a lot of cultural, there's Muslims and Buddhists find that quite offensive that people are walking around showing so much skin. So there's, that was obviously manifested in the bombings in Kuta some years ago. That it was really a response, a negative response and a reaction to the feelings of excess that Australians were exercising when they were in Bali, and that the Balinese found it to be quite culturally inappropriate. The safety and health of residents and tourists, such as sewerage, resilience of structures, planning for hazards and water quality, as I've discussed before. Trust this add-in. Okay, let's see if I can play this for you. Oh, add-in morning. Oh, here we go. It should work. This is this rock bar. This is a video. Hopefully it's not too foggy for you to see. This is a YouTube video of rock bar. Oh, it's unavailable. Oh, sorry about that. If you wanted to Google rock bar, and large wave, you will see that this place here actually has, there's a massive, I don't know if it's a storm wave or if it's tsunami from an earthquake or what it is, but a huge wave just comes in and totally destroys a whole section of that rock bar. And in Australia, probably you wouldn't have so many of those issues. Having said that, you know, Hamilton Island Resort was just destroyed by a cyclone, so it's not always right. So that's, you know, I guess showing that this may not be as resilient because it may not be as well planned as what it might be if it was in a developing nation with much more stringent planning procedures. Okay, Kuta Beach and Denpasar City development. The water table is compromised. Too many hotels are taking too much water and it's unregulated and corrupt. There's the water park development. Moral and cultural conflicts, I've already discussed, food and drink standards, and deaths. So people you've probably heard about people having cheap alcohol in certain parts of Kuta, and they are not meeting health and safety standards. People are drinking them and they're actually poison and they die. And dying from, you know, seafood that maybe not being prepared properly or managed properly and so forth. So there have been deaths in that way because the restrictions and regulations aren't as stringent. So this is Kuta and bombing, which I've already discussed. This is some markets in Kuta, and this is my daughter getting a henna tattoo on the beach in Kuta. Okay, so lessons from Bali. This is where we'd probably have a discussion if it was all of us, but it's just me, sorry. What lessons can we learn about sustainability from the development in Bali? It's a lot more complicated than you might think when you look at it from the outside. What would be a positive progression for Bali, do you think? What are the barriers to this progression? And what frameworks can we use to assess the relative successes and failures of Bali in terms of sustainability? These are really good questions to ask. And I'd really encourage you to think about this, and this may be able to form a structure for your reflective essay if you want it to. But these are the sort of questions to think about. How would we assess this? How would we decide whether this is working? You know, if we go back to all of our frameworks, and I think have I got some? Oh, yeah. How would we go back to all of our frameworks and think about what is happening, you know, in Bali and whether it's working and whether it's not? Thinking about the 5 pillars of sustainable tourism. Are they really the right ones? When we're thinking about Bali, are they really covering the issues? They might be, they might not be. It's worth thinking about. Okay. Learning from experience, challenges for tourism as a strategy for development. Finding a framework to assess development within. It needs to be flexible but clear. Tourism is a strategy for economic development, but sustainable tourism is the only way it can be a tool for sustainable development. Yeah. So sustainable tourism is the only, so tourism isn't a strategy for sustainable development. Sustainable tourism is a strategy for sustainable development. It's very important to understand that it has to be sustainable tourism. And what are the characteristics of sustainable development? Okay, accreditation, right? This is one way that people think about measuring sustainable development is by, to achieving sustainable development is by accreditation. So I'm just going to run through very quickly, because I know this has been a long lecture, some different types of, don't mind my dog walking out the back there. So here we have the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, so you can look that up online. Like I say, I know this has been a long lecture, so I'm more than happy for you to look up this stuff yourself. But this is to recognise and reward genuine practitioners of sustainable tourism. Accredits various accreditation schemes. So it's an accreditor of accreditation schemes. So Ecotourism Australia is accredited by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. So if you want to have an accreditation scheme that's globally recognised, you go to the Global Sustainable Tourism Council to get recognised. It has criteria for operators, destinations. It focuses on overall management, economic, social and environmental impacts and contributions. And there's a list of members. So you can have a look at the gstcouncil.org and have a think about, you know, what it gives you the criteria for operators and destinations you can have a look at. I'm not going to go through this because this will take forever. So these are each one of the criteria for operators and the criteria for destinations, okay? So effective sustainable management. Is this for, I think this is the criteria for destinations. Yeah, this is the criteria for destinations. Compliance with all, so this is all of the ways that they say this, and this is quite useful because when you're thinking about Bali, for example, and you start thinking about effective, you start thinking about sustainable tourism management and accreditation, you start thinking, well, maybe these are some frameworks. A lot of people have already thought about this stuff. Maybe these are some frameworks that we can use to really assess sustainable tourism. You know what, this is a really good opportunity to think about your reflection. Do you agree? Do you think this would work based on your knowledge of different destinations? Do you think this would work? Compliance with legislation, Indigenous rights, customer satisfaction, measured planning, design, construction, renovation, operation and demolition, respecting natural and cultural heritage, using locally appropriate sustainable practices and materials. This stuff is really good stuff. Like, this stuff is the sort of stuff you'd think, all right, okay, maybe we can do this. Information and interpretation of the natural and cultural surroundings. Social and economic benefits and impacts. Yeah, look, I just don't think I've got time to go through this list, but I would really encourage you to have a look at it because it's very, very valuable in thinking about how things might be done on a tourism level well, and whether you agree. Cultural heritage, yeah, following established guidelines for visits to culturally or historically sensitive sites. So that's things like, you know, not climbing on the ruins, things like that. Yeah. Not climbing, you know, stomping on the new seedlings of the very rare tree that you're just looking at. Incorporating elements of local art, architecture or cultural heritage in operations. And this is really, really good stuff. I like this stuff. That might say more about me and who I am and how I view development than it does actually about whether this development might be sustainable or not. Environmental benefits and impacts, so conserving ecosystems and so forth, treating wastewater, not harvesting wildlife species, avoiding invasive species, you know, all those sort of standard environmental management practices. Okay, so that's that. I've tried to sort of gloss over that a little bit because you can have a look and read for yourself. Geotourism, so National Geographic talks about geotourism as being, I think of geotourism as being tourism of rock formations and stuff, like geological tourism. They tried to sort of put out this idea of geotourism as being tourism that sustains or enhances the distinctive geographical character of a place, its environment, heritage, aesthetics, culture and the well-being of its residents. So they talk, this is another framework for sustainable tourism: environmentally responsible, culturally responsible, synergistic. Oh, they're the three. Sorry, I thought there was actually a long list, and there is a long list, but that's not the list. Okay, so that environmentally, culturally, and bringing together all the elements of geographical character to create a travel experience that's richer. So they're talking about celebrating everything. And then they have these sort of principles, 13 geotourism principles for governments and operators. So they're, again, similar to the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, talking about practices for operators and destinations. The National Geographic Society has principles, the 13 principles as well. Integrity of a place, international codes, community involvement, community benefit, tourist satisfaction, conservation of resources, protection and enhancement of destination appeal, planning, land use, market diversity, interactive interpretation, market selectivity, evaluation. And evaluation is obviously, you know, thinking about how these things are working and so forth. So you can start to see that there's actually been a huge amount of thought put into sustainable tourism practice, right through from the UNWTO's 12. Here we go. I'm just going to skip through all of this. What do we have there? The UNWTO's 12 practices for sustainable tourism. What have we got? Okay, look, that 12 aims for sustainable tourism, right? So they're aims, they're things that we should be trying to achieve. Okay, that's them there, right? Then we go into this triangle business, 5 pillars of sustainable tourism for development, right? This is what then the WTO is talking about there. Now, then we're looking at the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and they've got a big list of suggestions on how these things can be achieved. There we go. And then we've got the National Geographic and their ideas of how geotourism can be, principles of geotourism. So you can see there's actually a lot of people who are thinking about how these things can be achieved, what they should be aiming for and how they should do it. And I guess what we're interested in from you in terms of thinking about your reflective essays, thinking about a structure like this and reflecting on how it could actually achieve sustainable tourism for development. So thinking more broadly, can tourism assist in achieving sustainable development? Can it? Is there a better way of framing it or thinking about it? Is sustainable tourism possible? Can you sustain an industry that tends to be sort of focused on growth? And if so, what should the principles be and how should or could these be implemented? All right. The next lecture is on sustainable tourism development plans, these are some of the readings for that. These are the references for this lecture, and I look forward to talking to you in your next lecture.